So in chapter 1 of The Wizard and the Prophet, they talk about kind of population changes. So this was something that we talked about last time, that the global human population change is kind of exploding, and in this chapter he relates it to other species and how other species kind of have this pattern of growing and growing and growing as they are consuming more resources and more food, and then eventually kind of reach some point where they run out of resources and they can collapse. And so this was one question that's kind of gets at that theme, that according to Lynn Margulis, every successful species wipes itself out. And he's kind of inviting you to think about humans in this context. And so I just wanted to pick up on this very last question of the quiz. That's it was human populations do appear to be leveling off. So we talked about that a little bit last time when we talked about the prologue of the book. And then I wanted to ask you to think about, is this because we're running out of food, like the microorganisms that are described in the petri dish of the book? And the answer to that is no. So, in the book, they talk about this, petri dish where basically you start off with a bunch of food and you put a bacteria in there and it just starts eating and consuming and consuming. And then it eventually, its population increases and it goes up what they call this S curve. And then eventually it starts running into limits, and it either levels off or it can collapse back down the other way. And so in the book, they kind of talk about like, humans might very well be like this, and we're seeing our populations increase and increase and increase. But, when we run out of food, essentially, or run out of resources from the earth, we could collapse and wipe ourselves out. And I think that, the book is being intentionally provocative. It's trying to provoke thoughts about that, which is very valuable. But I did want to point out that does not appear to be what we are doing, actually. So the kind of last sentence here from the book, from this chapter, is from this standpoint, the answer to the question, are we doomed to destroy ourselves, is yes. That we could be some sort of magical exception, it seems unscientific. Why should we be different? Is there any evidence that we are special? And I wanted to point out that there actually is evidence that we are special. And the evidence goes back to this graph that I showed last time, is that humans, our populations have been kind of exploding from a zoomed out kind of millennial timescale. But we're seeing that the growth rate of our population is decreasing since the late 1960s, and human populations are leveling off, just as material well-being for humans continues to increase and increase and increase. So even though we're not running out of food, and in fact, we have more food than ever, our populations are leveling off and our growth rates are decreasing. And so this is there's a number of graphs over here, but they're basically telling the story of how since the 1960s, human food availability has just increased and increased and increased. So like this top graph up here is yields of corn and rice and wheat. So that's tons per hectare, showing that we've been able to get more calories per unit of land over time. And there's just more calories available overall. And actually this graph in the bottom left is interesting. This is showing that in the early 2000s, the global problem of obesity, the health problem of obesity became a larger health problem globally than malnourishment or people who are underweight. So showing that it's definitely not that humans are running out of food and that's why the population is leveling off. Um, and so that is evidence that we are special in relation to kind of the thought experiment that was given in the book, that all other species that we know of seem to increase their populations kind of indefinitely as long as there's resources available. And so we've seen this, over time, that as people have become materially better off, our growth rates in population have decreased. And we also see this across countries. So this is a graph of fertility rate, or births per woman, on the y-axis, and then average income, essentially how rich the country is, on the x-axis. And so we see a negative relationship here. So there's a lot of scatter, of course. There's a lot of things going on, and they have not just by country, but they have it broken up by income within country. But basically what you're seeing here is that that if you're in a richer country, or if you're in a situation where you're materially better off, you tend to have less kids. And it's the countries where there's more poverty, where there's higher fertility rates. So again, we would expect this relationship to be the exact opposite if humans behaved the same way that bacteria in the petri dish did. We would expect that when there's more resources, we have more kids and more population growth. And so we're seeing the exact opposite. So that's just something that's one of the very good trends that we see in this class. We talk a lot about bad trends and trends to be worried about. If this was the opposite, then we would be in quite a predicament, because the very basis of long-term sustainability of a society of humans would be that we need to kind of have populations level off at some level. Cannot be sustained indefinitely to have growth of human populations. So the fact that they are leveling off kind of without any top-down control is good news. And so there's entire semester-long classes on this phenomenon as to why this is happening, and it's really interesting, and it spans a bunch of different trends. So part of it, has to do with family planning and contraception, but a big part of it just has to do with long-term empowerment of women and education of women. So just think broadly about societies becoming more egalitarian between the sexes, and in a society that says a woman's only job is to be a mother, it makes sense that in those societies you're going to have more children, right? And over time, more societies have moved towards women being, much larger participators in the society at large. And so the job is not just to be a mom, and then the man's job is also to be a father, and so you have more co-parenting in that sense. And so those are some of the bigger reasons for the decrease in fertility.